Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I have Jeremy DeSilva. Jeremy is an associate professor of anthropology at Dartmouth College. He holds a PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Michigan. And his first book, First Steps: How Upright Walking Made Us Human, was just released. It's a fantastic book, and that's what we talk about the most in this conversation. We start out by talking about some of the evolutionary history of the hominoids, hominins, and hominids, and the differences. We talk about bipedalism, which is what his book is about. Why he studied that, what its earliest evolutionary history is. And then we move on to the importance of Lucy, one of the quote-unquote first humans, and the similar anatomy that she has with modern-day humans. We talk about the importance of the earlier ancestor Ardi and the differences and similarities to Lucy. We talk about where Homo Erectus fits into the picture. We have this really nice exchange about whether bipedalism was essential for human evolution, or could we have evolved many of the things that we have without walking upright. So we have a nice exchange about that. We talk about the elements of gait for different human species. And we talk about bipedalism and the aspects of birth giving, which is absolutely fascinating part of the conversation, and many other topics. Jeremy has written a great book. I remember reading this and I reached out to him, and he was very kind to come on. One of the lovely things about Jeremy is not only is he super smart, has been doing this for a while, but he has such a passion and enthusiasm, and you really can hear that in the conversation. And it was interesting because, this isn't my world necessarily, but, I was also very enthused, and it really rubs off on you in all the best ways. And so this was absolutely fantastic. He was generous to give me over 2 hours of his time, and I highly encourage everyone to get his book. And so now I bring you Jeremy DeSilva. I am here with Jeremy DeSilva. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking about your book and your research and what you do. I'm super excited.
Great. Thank you, Xavier. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So just tell listeners who you are, what you do, what your research is in, and any new stuff that you're working on.
Oh, sure. So my name is Jeremy DeSilva. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Dartmouth College. And I'm a kind of anthropologist called a paleoanthropologist. So I'm a paleontologist, studies fossils, right? But then anthropology study humans, so I study human fossils. Mm-hmm. And I'm particularly interested in the origins and evolution of upright walking. Moving on two legs is a strange way to move around a world for a mammal. And so I investigate through the fossil record how this happened, why this happened, and the circumstances, ecological circumstances under which this occurred. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I've not been able to travel to Eastern Africa, South Africa, where I typically do my work. Sure. But the work continues. I have colleagues there who are continuing to find fossils, and they will 3D laser scan fossils and then send me an email, and I can print out fossils with a 3D printer and start to do anatomical descriptions of the remains. So the science carries on.
Yeah. That's great. That's super fascinating. So you've just put out a book. Now tell me, is this your first book, or where is this in the pantheon for you?
Yeah, it is my first single-authored book. Earlier this year, in February, I edited a series of essays that were contributed by colleagues on the 150th anniversary of Darwin's Descent of Man. Mm-hmm. It was called A Most Interesting Problem. Mm-hmm. But with that one, I didn't do much writing. I was just I was herding cats and getting all of the information compiled. And so this indeed is my first book that I've authored. Yeah.
I've heard on the editing side that sometimes that can be somewhat more difficult than the actual writing process. It's very difficult, but it's just like different hats is what I hear. So it's interesting.
It's funny you mentioned that. Look, I mean, everyone tackles projects like this differently. The writing for me was not a challenge. I loved it. I loved writing. It's the editing. Yeah. Exactly. It's the paring down. It's the cleaning up the language. It's the, what is it that I actually want to say here, and can I say it in a way that's a little clearer. And then with that other book, editing other people's work, which it's easier to edit your own because you can just say, okay, this sentence is garbage and throw it away. Right. And it's harder to do that with someone else's work. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the book is First Steps: How Upright Walking Made Us Human. I was telling you before we hit record here. I mean, I saw it. I was super fascinated. I got it. I mean, it's been out maybe less than a month, and I inhaled it. I mean, I think I read it in a couple days. It was really good. All that editing paid off. It's great writing. I marked it up a bunch, and so I'm just super excited to talk about all of the stuff that's in there and all your research. And I definitely hope people will pick it up and buy it. It's a great read. I hope so too. I loved writing it. So I really appreciate the feedback. Yeah. No, it's great. So maybe your book is divided into 3 parts. And so I figured that would be a good way to kind of structure the conversation. Of course, I want people to buy it, so we won't give all the fun details of it, but we can kind of give a really nice kind of overview of what it is and flush out some of the larger points. So in the beginning, as one does, you kind of give a kind of an evolutionary history of us as hominins, and then go all the way forward as throughout the book goes. And so you talk in the first book about Lucy and the various subspecies and all that. So maybe something that may be helpful for listeners, because not everybody will know this, is maybe giving us a little bit of that kind of foundation, kind of set the table. Yep. About so there's us humans, and that's before we can kind of get to us humans, we belong in a certain class and genus and all that stuff. And so maybe take us all the way back. We have a common ancestor, and then it just splinters and splits off, and all these different types of classifications. So maybe just kind of start there and slowly work our way, so that will be helpful in understanding all the other I'd be happy to do that. So it's been known since Darwin's time that humans are closely related to the African great apes. Those would be gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. Bonobos weren't even known to Darwin. They weren't even discovered by Western science until 1933. And this relationship was understood on the basis of comparative anatomy and comparative behavior. And it wasn't until the molecular revolution of the 1960s and into the 70s, 80s, and continues now that we've been able to really place humans in the family tree. And we know that humans are most closely related to, the African great apes, but in particular to chimpanzees and bonobos. That they're our first cousins, and gorillas are our second cousins, orangutans are third, and gibbons are our fourth. But collectively, that group are known as the apes, or the hominoids. These are tailless, large-bodied primates that spend a lot of time in the trees eating lots of fruit. Both because of our knowledge of genetics and comparative DNA, but also because of fossils that we have to fill in those missing pieces, those gaps. We can estimate that the common ancestor that we shared with chimpanzees lived about 6 million years ago. Now, there's the T-shirt, coffee bumper sticker representation of human evolution, right? That we come from a chimp, and we don't. Chimps live today. They're our relatives. They're not our ancestors. And so that common ancestor is not a chimpanzee, but it's an ape that lived, again, about 6 million years ago. And it makes a lot of sense that it would be in Africa, given that chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas live there today. So that's where most researchers are searching for fossils of things of that nature. So what do we have? Well, it's not much. We've got a skull from central Chad. There's some material from Ethiopia, some fossils from Kenya, and they're confusing, and they should be. A common ancestor is not going to clearly look like one lineage or another. It's going to have some blending of the two, and it's going to have its own unique characteristics as well. Sure. And it looks like there's some variation going on at the origin of the lineage. But nonetheless, what we can tell, and what I read about in the book, and I find fascinating, is that what we can tell are that the changes that happen, the very first changes that separate our lineage off from the lineage that led to chimpanzees, the lineage that led to gorillas. It's not our large brain. It's not our technology. It's not our language or our art. It's the way we move. It's bipedalism. So we see hints of upright walking on the ground in some of these early fossils. And they have fancy names. We call them Sahelanthropus, Auroran, Artipithecus. But really, just these early things you can think about as being very ape-like from the neck up, chimpanzee-sized brains, snoutiness to the face, and long arms with curved fingers. They're still able to climb trees really, really, really well. But there are some tweaks to the pelvis and to the foot that indicate that when they're on the ground, they don't knuckle walk. When they're on the ground, they're moving on two legs. And then around 4 million years ago, we start to find fossils of, what I would refer to as hominin 2.0. Hominins are the name we give to all these things that are these fossils that are more closely related to you and I than to a chimpanzee. We call them hominins. These are from a genus we call Australopithecus, and Australopithecus is best known from Lucy, the famous Lucy skeleton. She's about 3.2 million years old. And with Australopithecus, we find all sorts of different kinds of them in South Africa, East Africa, even Central Africa. Many, many different species have been named. We argue about whether they're different species or not, or if they're just regional variants that traded genes with each other. We have those debates. But it does look like there's quite a bit of variation in what they ate, the kinds of habitats they were living in. And what I'm finding is even in the way they walked, in the mechanics of their walking. So there were the different experiments going on in how to move from point A to point B. But more or less, especially with Lucy species, it looks like they walked a lot like us. And that bipedalism was established. Human-like bipedalism was established early in our evolutionary history. And then it's around 2 million years ago that, again, you start to see different kinds of critters in the fossil record. And these are things we attribute to our own genus Homo. Larger brains, smaller teeth, greater reliance on stone tool technology, longer legs. And then we start to find those fossils not in Africa anymore. We find them, yes, in Africa, but also into Europe and into Asia. So there's a range expansion that happens at that point. And this is what most of your listeners would know as Homo erectus. Homo erectus then spreading around the globe, or at least through Eurasia. And in Europe, they evolve into Neanderthals. In Asia, they evolve into the Denisovans. There seem to be these pop-up island populations known as Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. And then even in Africa, we find this amazing fossil of something called Homo naledi, which has a small brain, even though it's much more recent in time than I think most of us would have expected. But it's in Africa that we think we have the first evidence, both genetic and fossil evidence, for our own species, Homo sapiens, evolving over a stretch of time somewhere in the ballpark of 250,000 to 350,000 years ago. And so, that sort of big picture human evolution that, if you go all the way back to the beginning, though, what is it that started this lineage going? What I can tell from the fossil record that we have is that it's upright walking. It's this new form of locomotion, at least for an ape.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like the way you really laid that out, because I feel like a lot of times when people discuss these things, they get bits and pieces, and then as we start to have it splinters on the kind of the tree, it starts to get more kind of confusing.
Oh yeah.
So I would say that just you can help me out here. I mean, you'll obviously know more than I will on this, but that I think sometimes when people say, okay, well, we don't come from chimps, we don't come from monkeys, right? That's kind of, a very poor caricature of evolution. But sometimes people say, well, we have a common ancestor. And so sometimes people say, okay, but I still think sometimes people kind of get a little fuzzy about that. And so my understanding is that if you take the common ancestor that would look sort of like an ape of sorts, but I mean, not exactly, kind of like you had stated, basically that species is procreating over thousands of years, over and over and over and over. And based on the environment and based on just natural selection, just little changes over time, a little bit, the further away you get, and we're talking thousands of years, then it's, and maybe even longer, all those little changes over time is like, well, this doesn't look anything like what this ancestor looks like anymore. Now it's like a new thing. And so then when you're talking about 6 million years to 4 million years, we're talking about 2 million years, right? Which is a terribly long time. Yeah. And you start to see all the splintering. It's like, okay, well, it's so far and it's been evolving over time that now we call it Australopithecus, or now we call it, something else. And then there's continuous splintering where, we're having it. But so that's, I think, important for listeners to remember. But then I guess the other question I have on that is that we have the, maybe explain the differences, I think, because I've also got it confused before as well, is we have something called the hominins or hominids. And then we get all the way to Homo, right? Which is you have Homo erectus, you have Homo sapien. And so at a certain point, what was it, 50,000, 60,000 years ago, there was 4 different subspecies, if that's the right word, of humans on the planet, or quote unquote humans, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So Denisovans, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and who's the other? There's at least 4, maybe more.
Right, and it depends on the chunk of time you're looking at, but yeah, and this has been one of the great discoveries of the last decade or so. When I was in grad school, it was pretty clear cut that you had Homo erectus evolving into Homo sapiens, and the big argument was, what do we do with Neanderthals? Yeah. And a lot of folks were arguing, oh, they're just our extinct cousins, and we exterminated them, and we didn't, that they are a different species. And then you had other folks saying, no, we share too many things in common with them, both anatomically and behaviorally. And there's a good chance that we interbred with them, and therefore they are us, right? They end up being ancestors of to some degree. And then, those arguments went back and forth. But really that was what the focus was on when it came to the late Pleistocene. And frankly, I found that kind of boring. And to me, the late Pleistocene was like, they're all humans. They're all walking like I do. And so if I'm interested in locomotion, I'm going back in time. I'm going back to the Pliocene. I'm going back to the time of Lucy. I'm going back to Australopithecus. And the last decade and a half has just shattered that view, because what we've discovered, like you said, right, there are the Denisovans in Asia, which we know about mostly from genetics. We know very little about what they actually looked like. We don't have many fossils, but we have a genome, so we know what their genetics are. And then incredible discoveries happening in the Indonesian archipelago and in the Philippines of these tiny-bodied, literally 3.5 foot tall, as adults, hominins with large feet and short legs and tiny brains. And they've been nicknamed the Hobbit, which some people sort of bristle at that. I think it's great because it allows the public to sort of understand this on through some cultural context that they get. That most people are familiar with the concept of Middle Earth, where there are these different humanoid type things coexisting, some of which are interbreeding with each other, right? And that's exactly what we know now from the genetics, that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals could have fertile offspring. Same with the Denisovans. There appears to be another population in Africa that contributed to the human gene pool that we're still not really sure what it was. likely it's what we're currently calling Homo heidelbergensis. But these words that we put on these things are kind of arbitrary.
Yeah.
If there's gene flow going on, then what we call these things ends up just being sort of a placeholder for populations, right, that are existing in space and in time, and it's really complex. And so my students struggle with this all the time, where I tell them about the names of these things, and then I say, okay, there's this species and that species, but they likely had fertile offspring, and the students get all fired up and they say, well, then they can't be different species. And I said, well, okay, but doesn't that just show you that that our definition of species needs to be tweaked a little bit, or maybe it's not, that the natural world really doesn't care about the rules that we impose on it. That maybe it's a little more complicated. And I think that's exactly what's happening as we find more of these fossils, is that we're finding fossils that we struggle to put in one species or another, and it's, well, isn't that exactly what you would expect if evolution has happened?
Right.
So we're reaching a point now where we're finding enough of these things that what we've named them conventionally has become problematic. And to me, that's great. It means we've reached sort of this maturation in our science, that we're beginning to see broader trends in these populations. And what we're calling these things ends up just, as I said, being somewhat arbitrary and being, placeholders for evolving lineages and branching lineages, as you said earlier. So, right, if we look at 100,000 years ago, as you said, you got Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, Homo sapiens in Africa. Most likely, Homo naledi may still be hanging around in Africa, although the youngest we have of them is about 250,000 years old. So they may be gone by then. But then at that point, 100,000 years, you still have what's been identified as Homo erectus in Indonesia, in sites in Java. And then you have the two hobbit populations, Homo floresiensis and luzonensis, in the Philippines and in Indonesia. So it's a remarkable world to think about, of what the earliest Homo sapiens the world they would have encountered as they were beginning to expand their territories and go into these places. They would have seen other humans, and some of them they would have recognized as mates, and some of them I don't think they would have.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I liken it to when you look at any other, or not any other, but most other animals in the animal kingdom and on the planet. There's like how many types of like wasps and how many types of spiders and how many types. It's like, oh, there's 9 species of this spider. And it's like, oh, like, and it clicks and it makes sense. And then when it's like, yeah, but there's only one human. It's like, no, I mean, we're the last ones to survive, but there was many others. We were all cohabitating the planet at the same time with other, 4 or 5 or 6 other types of humans. And
that's right.
I think for some people, just, I don't know, maybe it's because we've been, in the modern world and all that stuff, just the only ones. And maybe there's a little bit of the narcissism there, but it's like, oh yeah, there was more of us. And so the species we call human, that sits within the larger umbrella of the hominids. Right. Correct.
Yeah. I mean, if you start small and build on it, the species we call, human, Homo sapiens, is within that genus Homo. And then you've got lots of different kinds of those: Homo neanderthalensis, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis. And then if you broaden out from there, then you've got a group called hominins, and hominins are upright walking apes. So these are things that are more closely related to us and include us. That's where you've got Lucy now. Australopithecus would be a sister genus to our own, and there are many different species of them too. Australopithecus sediba is a skeleton that's over my shoulder right now, a discovery made in 2010. So recent discovery of an Australopithecus. There was even a new species named in 2015 by Johannes Haile Selassie based on discoveries in Ethiopia. So we keep finding more and more diversity when it comes to these hominin lineages. And again, this is sort of, quite different from when I was in grad school learning this stuff. There was a branching tree, but there weren't too many branches on it, and things looked pretty linear. It doesn't really look that way anymore. And we're trying to think of the right metaphor, for the public. We're still, I still use trees. I still think trees are good. The beginning of my book, I have a tree, but
beautiful. I think I made a tweet about it. I looked at it and I opened it up and I said, wow, just right from the start, it's the most beautiful tree I've seen in a while. It's great. It's fantastic.
I love it. So Alexis Seabrook is the illustrator for it.
That's great.
She's so talented, and she and I must have exchanged 100 emails back and forth where I said, actually take this twig and shift it that way a tiny bit. Otherwise, this researcher is not going to be happy with me. And then do this, or that researcher is not going to be happy with me. Right. And so I think in this family tree, there's something in there for everyone.
That's great. I love it.
But there's also plenty in there for people to argue about. And I'm fine with that. Like, family trees are hypotheses to be tested. And this is one.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I conceptualize it, it's like when I think about, as we get out from the humans and we go to the hominids, it's like kind of like there's different species of tiger, but they're all big cats, right? Yeah. There's leopards and cheetahs and tigers and lions, but they're all, my house cat, but they're all a big family. And I kind of think of the hominids as sort of kind of similar to that as an example. But
and with that analogy, what we would do to put them on the same scientific footing is I would then invite in chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans. And then you would have your ape family, your hominids is what we would call them. And then gibbons are the ones that sort of get left out of that group. But once they're invited in, because they don't have tails and they can lift their arms above their head like I can, then it's okay. Now we've got the full ape family, and we call those hominoids. And tons of fossils of those too. And an equally confusing picture of ape evolution in a time period known as the Miocene, which some people will call the planet of the apes, that there were just tons and tons and tons of different kinds of apes. And what's interesting, I think, to a lot of folks learning this for the first time is that we often, can't help but think of this as hierarchical, and that apes are, quote unquote, more evolved than monkeys. But in reality, the common ancestor of an ape and a monkey had ape-like teeth, but a monkey-like body. And so it was sort of again, some weird blending of the two. And then they split and they diverged. And early on in the Miocene, apes were wildly successful. You find apes all over Africa, into Southern Europe. There are apes in France, Spain, Greece, Italy, Turkey, Hungary, Germany, apes through Pakistan into India and all the way to China and throughout Africa. And monkeys are super rare. Monkeys are just, nowhere to be seen. Not nowhere, but you'll be at a fossil site, 20 million year old fossil site, and 18 million year, and you find ape fossils, and they're pretty common. It's when you find a monkey fossil that everyone gets excited because they're so rare. And now
everyone kind of moving around, you're like, we must have found a monkey fossil.
Found a monkey. That's right. And then you get into the Pliocene and it's the Pleistocene, more recent, so like 6 million, 5 million, 4 million, 3 million. And you go, to these fossil sites and there's monkeys everywhere, and apes are exceptionally rare. And that's what the world today. Like, apes are all on the verge of extinction. They're highly endangered. And yes, have we had a role in that? You bet we have. But they were dwindling before human population boom and human encroachment on their environment. This was already happening. And so we see that evolutionarily, that there's this crisscrossing through time where monkeys end up being evolutionarily, quote unquote, successful. They become more diverse, more numerous, and the apes plummet.
So I was going to say about one other quick thing, and then we can talk about Lucy and Australopithecus and start getting into the bipedal stuff. Is
Sure.
is it's one of the criticisms for evolution by certain groups will be, well, where are all the intermediary species, right? Where are they, right? If evolution's this big, great, model and all this stuff, where are they? And then, I usually now point people to the fossil record. Like, have you seen the fossil record? And then how you understand in the past 20 years, like we're seeing it. We're seeing all this, how it's splintered on the tree. We're seeing all of the intermediary kinds of things that get to humans, and then before that, and at the same time, and right before human, Homo sapiens in their current state. And so I think when you just look at any of the fossil record, you just see the power of evolution, where you just say, like, for this animal, right, for us as apes, it's like, or in that family, it's like you can see where it all comes from. You can see all, not every single one, but as folks like yourself keep looking at fossils, it's like, we found another subset of this. Wow. Like, this is like, this fills in, colors in more of the gaps a little bit. And it's like, okay, and so I think that's, again, kind of a testament to, evolutionary, fact and how it works, and especially for us and then for other animals as well.
That's right. And, one of the things that I'll do with my students in an introductory course is I show them a fossil from, it's a fossil from Egypt, from an area known as the Valley of the Whales. And it's a fossilized foot from a whale. Whales don't have feet.
Right.
But these do.
This blows their mind when they see this. They just blow their mind.
It blows their mind.
Blew my mind the first time.
Right? Like, whales with feet, whales with legs. Here's a whale femur. Mm-hmm. It's just like, wait, whales don't have femur. So, right, the fossil record is so rich, and the fossil record tells these absolutely extraordinary stories. People have asked me, what is the value of fossils when we can just use comparative anatomy and genetics to sort of figure out, evolutionary history? We could. If fossils weren't a thing, if fossilization, if the geology of our planet was such that fossils couldn't ever form, we'd still be able to work out an evolutionary history by studying genetics and studying comparative anatomy and comparative behavior. Fossils allow us to retell the story of how it all happened and what the dead ends were along the way. You could use genetics to show that birds are closely related to crocodiles and alligators, right? You could use, the genetics and comparative anatomy to say, okay, these are sister groups, birds and crocodiles. And listeners, if you're confused about that, just look at a bird's feet. Mm-hmm. Next time you look at a bird, look at its feet. It's a reptile. Mm-hmm. And but you could work that all out and say, okay, they shared a common ancestor and it lived 250 million years ago, but you'd never know about dinosaurs and the amazing diversity that dinosaurs and like Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, I don't know if we call it Brontosaurus still, but all these amazing experiments that went on in those 200 million years of dinosaurs' existence. So with human evolution, I see things the same way, right? We know that humans are closely related to chimpanzees. We can estimate when the common ancestor existed. We can use genetics to try to figure out what genes were flipped on and flipped off, and regulatory genes this way and that way, and we could answer a lot of the questions. But I'm not sure we would ever be able to even imagine an Artipithecus or an Australopithecus or something like Lucy. And so those transitional fossils very much exist. Our brains today are a little over 1,300 cubic centimeters on average or so. And a chimpanzee's is a little under 400 cubic centimeters. So we've got about 1,000 cubic centimeter difference. That's like almost 3 cans of Coke, worth of material that we have in our brains, more than a chimp does. Okay, so where are the intermediates? Well, we've got fossils that are 400 cubic centimeters, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400. We all of the dots are connected.
Yeah, that's marvelous. That's marvelous.
But it doesn't mean we have it all figured out either.
Right.
So that's the thing that I think we struggle with as science educators is, look at all we've learned. Look at all this amazing stuff we know. But it doesn't mean we have it all figured out. There's still so many questions we have. And there's still the fact that new discoveries really do force us to re-examine what we thought we knew.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how science works. So, I love when there's a new discovery
Mm-hmm.
that's entirely different from what I sort of thought was going on. Because it forces me, but I think it allows me to just go back and re-examine the fossils through a new lens.
Mm-hmm.
Say, well, wait a minute, are we sure we have this right? And oftentimes the answer is yes,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it's not, and we get to tweak it along the way. The more fossils we find, we answer some questions, but we get to ask new ones we never even thought to ask.
Yeah, no, that's super tremendous. How we get a lot of answers, and then it's like, well, there's still more answers, but we have enough of I would say, as we keep having our technological advances, that we don't just have a rough sketch anymore. Like, we have a lot of things filled in, but not everything. And that's that's why you get up in the morning,
That's right. Exactly. I mean, if we had all the answers, then, I'd find something else to do we didn't have all the answers about. But, the last thing I'll say on this topic is that I used to work at a science museum, the Boston Museum of Science, and handing people replicas of the fossils, letting them hold them, letting them see the differences between a human and our ancestors and an ape, making the comparisons themselves, asking the questions, is tremendously powerful. And we, as a scientific community, could do a much better job of making sure that all of the fossils that are here, that have been found by the scientific community and are the transitional fossils that people ask, well, where are they? And they beg to see them. We could do a much better job of making sure that every classroom in America has a set of them, or every science museum around has these, so that we can say, well, look, this is what we have. And this is how we're interpreting them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Even for myself, it wasn't until I really saw it. Like, I saw in pictures and in books and, on the internet and videos, but when you see it, and you either, can see it under a glass, or you can hold it sometimes, or I mean, there's something really, like, the tangible aspect of it is really, it does come to life, and it's like, this is a real thing. And so I totally agree with you there. Okay. So, but, so before we keep going, let's get the big question out of the way. And there's a bunch of other sub questions that will branch off into it. So why bipedalism? Why are you focused on this aspect? And how is, so let's start with the kind of the early pieces of it, and then, we'll keep going into it, because I know part 2 of your book and part 3 talks about it. So why did you decide to look at being bipedal and in humans, and then where that comes from? So here we can stay on Lucy and Australopithecus, and was it Ardi? Is that correct?
Ardi, right?
But before we get there, why bipedal? And then humans aren't the only ones that are bipedal, and apes aren't the only ones. So what was the first creature we know that's kind of walking upright, and then how that kind of gets all the way up to, the 6 million years, and then the 4 million. And so just kind of walk us through on the bipedal piece specifically.
Yeah. So as a student of this, I got very interested in locomotion and animals getting from point A to point B. That's an important thing for survival, getting away from predators and getting to where your food is. And so what always puzzled me about bipedalism were all of the disadvantages. That humans are unbelievably slow animals. Even the fastest human on Earth, Usain Bolt, the fastest he ever ran in his world record-setting 100-meter dash was 28 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly impressive for a human, but not really for any other animal.
Right.
It's slow. A zebra, an antelope, a leopard, a lion,
an ostrich.
They double that speed.
Yeah.
And so here we have the fastest human on Earth, and he can't even run half the speed of your typical African mammal, the continent on which we evolved. In addition to that, I work on at Dartmouth College, and we get a lot of snow and ice here, and I see people slipping and falling in their faces all the time, just falling. And I've got a dog, and I go hiking with my dog, and I fall, and the dog doesn't. And so I'm looking around, and I'm saying, geez, we're slow, we're clumsy, we fall all the time, and then when we get hurt, especially when our feet and legs get hurt, we're particularly vulnerable. An animal that moves on all fours, if it injures a limb, it's got three others to get around on. And we see this. You see dogs who are hurt or have a limb amputated, and they get along fine. I've seen this with zebras in the wild. With humans, though, if you really injure yourself, you're supposed to hop around, and you're not going to hop 28 miles an hour.
Nope.
And so how do you not just get eaten?
Yeah.
This seems like a recipe for extinction. And then as I started diving deeper into, okay, like you said, right, bipedalism is not entirely unique to humans. You do see other animals doing it occasionally. Bears will walk on two legs. Chimpanzees will do it. Gorillas will occasionally do it. And when it happens, people videotape it. They tape it with their phones. They put it on YouTube, and it gets millions of hits.
Oh yeah.
Like the CBS Morning News covered the story of a gorilla named Lewis in the St. Louis Zoo, who would occasionally, and really occasionally, like once every 2 weeks, get up on two legs and walk on two legs, because he would cradle tomatoes that his caretakers would put out for him. And he learned the hard way that the tomatoes squish if he knuckle walks with them in his hands, and he would get really upset about that. So he learned to cradle them and walk. And people lost their minds when they saw another animal moving on two legs. And so here we have this situation where, it so defines who we are as a species. It's unique to us in the sense that when we see another animal doing it, we have to videotape it. It makes the news. It's newsworthy, right? Yeah. When another animal does it, and yet we don't think about it, right? To us, it's I use the word, right? It's pedestrian to us, quite literally,
right? Yeah.
And it has all these sort of seeming maladaptive properties as well. And so this was something that demands an answer, right? How did this evolve? It's not self-evident that bipedalism would evolve in a lineage, because if it was, you'd see it more often in the animal world. You'd see it in other mammals. There are all sorts of diverse mammals that have evolved swimming independently. Think about whales and otters and seals. Flight has independently evolved a ton of times in different lineages. So what about bipedalism? So early in this book, I explore that. There are bipedal evidence of bipedal reptiles, for instance. The closest thing today would be what's called the basilisk lizard, or the Jesus Christ lizard, that'll run on two legs across stretches of water. There's evidence that they were lizards that did this more frequently, upwards of 300 million years ago, and they went extinct. That lineage went extinct. One of the great for me, I learned so much researching this book. One of the things that absolutely thrilled me was learning about bipedal crocodiles. We think about crocodiles as being some living fossil, right? Like they haven't changed in hundreds of millions of years. They have. Their earliest ancestors could get up on two legs and sprint on two legs. They were 9 feet tall, mouthful of razor sharp teeth, and could sprint, right? And you look at that and you say, okay, well, that's a killing machine. That thing should still be around, right? No. They evolved from that. They evolved quadrupedalism. Perhaps, for stealth hunting, they could lay low. I don't know. I don't know the reasons. Dinosaurs, right? we think about T-Rex running on two legs, or Velociraptor or Deinonychus or something like that. The earliest dinosaurs were bipedal. They moved on two legs. And from that, what do you get? Well, you get your Stegosaurus and you get your Apatosaurus, you get your quadrupeds. Bipedalism seems to be something that fails, for lack of a better word. That there are, it starts, it carries on, and then there's a dead end, or it evolves into quadrupedalism. It's rare to have something persist as a biped. One of the exceptions would be the big terrestrial birds, like ostriches and rays. But if you could connect the dots between an ostrich and some of those early bipedal dinosaurs. So they've had 250 million years to master this and refine terrestrial bipedalism. One of my favorite examples was an Australian kangaroo that was enormous. And instead of hopping, it was too big to hop. A paleontologist by the name of Christine Janis studied the bones of this animal. And she said, no, this looks like something that was striding, moving one leg at a time. It wasn't hopping, it was plodding one leg at a time. And that has now been confirmed with footprint evidence that's been collected. Kangaroo footprints moving 1 foot at a time bipedally. So the first humans who got to Australia 80,000 years ago or so would have seen walking kangaroos, right? But they're gone.
The yeah, it's quite
they're gone. Again, bipedalism sort of. So it's this wonderful mystery of, well, then why did then why is it successful in us? Why did bipedalism not only evolve, but why did it persist, and why did it eventually hang on in this lineage?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I remember. I think one of the pictures in the book is like a detailed or a sketch or artist rendering of that first reptile 300 million years ago. It's quite the image. It's like, oh my goodness. So yeah, no, I think that's great to know that, like, okay, bipedalism isn't just in humans, right? I mean, it's other animals do it, but I think it's kind of like what you were saying with the bear in the zoo or in the park is, right, when we're so accustomed to it now, like when we see another animal do it, it's like, well, that's what humans do. Like they're doing something human, but it really isn't. I mean, even for me, when my house cat, when she'll stand on just her hind legs and she'll just kind of go and try and reach for something or whatever, and just be on two legs, I freak out every time. I'm like, oh my God, this is wild,
Sure.
Because she's always on forward all the time, So, so I guess where does it get introduced by bipedalism to the apes, and in terms of history past, and then we can talk about Lucy and her genus and where she's at, and then and further.
Sure. So all apes can move bipedally, and one of the things that researchers have been quite interested in is what are the circumstances under which this happens, and does that give us some clue into why it was selectively beneficial in the earliest members of our own lineage. Chimpanzees will walk bipedally when they're carrying food. This has been observed by many researchers. Susanna Carvalho was the most recent to observe them raiding mango farms. This was in Western Africa, and they gather their arms with mango and papaya, and then they run away on their two legs because they can't knuckle walk with their arms full. It also appears to be something that happens in gorillas, for instance, when they're trying to intimidate. So they'll stand on two legs and chest thump. I observed this when I was with chimpanzees in Western Uganda in the Kabale National Forest. There was a chimpanzee named Berg. And Berg, I loved Berg. He was sort of this older male. He was kind of graying, and he would get all fired up, and he'd give his big booming call in the forest, and he'd stand on two legs and clumsily go running through the forest on his two legs, and then sit back down. And others would come and groom him and try to calm him down. So there are these observations that we've made on these other apes, but the fact remains that moving on two legs is part of the locomotor repertoire of an ape, and so it didn't come out of nowhere.
Sure.
It was present as a form of locomotion in the common ancestor that we share with chimpanzees and gorillas. And the way to really unpack that is to try to find fossils of that time period and to see, okay, well, what do they look like? The problem is, from 6 million, 7 million, 8 million, 9 million years ago, that time period when we were branching from the chimps and from gorillas, we have almost nothing in terms of skeletons, partial skeletons. We have nothing from Africa. Where we do have fossils are in Southern Europe, because apes used to have, as I mentioned earlier, apes had this really big territory that expanded beyond Africa and into Southern Europe. And so there are these fossils in Southern Europe that are giving us, I think, these clues into what sort of body bipedalism evolved from. And what we're finding are things that are actually more upright to begin with. These are things that were probably standing upright in the trees, almost like an orangutan or even a gibbon will do. They're smaller than your typical chimpanzee, but they're bigger than a gibbon. They're filling sort of this size gap that doesn't really exist today in any ape, which is pretty interesting ecologically. And they have these funny names, Dryopithecus, Pierolopithecus, Hispanopithecus, and there's a new one from Germany known as Danuvius. And Danuvius, to me, is particularly interesting because the knee and the ankle of it are very similar to what you see later on in human evolution. And it's too old, though, to be from a hominin, and it doesn't have the right dentition. It looks like it's a proper ape, but it has these hints of being able to stand upright, not on the ground, but in the trees. And so what some of us think now, and not everyone endorses this idea, but what some of us are hypothesizing at this point is that we didn't evolve bipedalism from a knuckle walker. That using chimpanzees as our model to try to say, okay, well, what are the circumstances under which they walk on two legs? Maybe we're going down the wrong path. Maybe that's not the way to address this question, because the body form of the earliest apes may have been, or the earliest African apes may have been more upright to begin with. And it's from that body then that you get knuckle walking independently in chimpanzees and gorillas. And that's what really needs to be explained, is where did knuckle walking come from? And as you get ecological changes to these African forests 4 million years ago, you have hominins that are able to move bipedally on the ground because they had this body that was already upright in the trees. So if this ends up being true, then bipedalism is not a new locomotion. It's an old locomotion, just in a new setting on the ground rather than up in the trees. And then we have all sorts of different questions of, okay, well, then why didn't that thing just go extinct? Being on the ground and now facing probably predation, a changing environment where getting your food might have been more challenging. You would have had to go greater distances to get your food. And that's where all sorts of ideas come in, that moving on two legs is actually quite energetically efficient. That the best way I've heard this explained is that if you want to lose a pound of weight by walking, you have to walk 70 miles. We're too good at it. We just move so efficiently that we don't burn much gas when we move from point A to point B. So maybe that's what was going on early in our ancestors, that this form of locomotion, you're slow, you're injury prone, but you're not going to burn much fuel. It also is beneficial in terms of dissipating heat. That if you move on all fours in a grassland environment, more your body is exposed to the equatorial sun. So maybe this was something that allowed us to cool off. And so a lot of these different hypotheses then end up coming into play once we've established bipedalism on this environment. But it looks like the earliest bipeds were not out in the grassland, not your typical explanation of, where did bipedalism come from? Oh, we needed to see over tall grass to see the predator. And then, by the way, the worst thing you could possibly do once you see that predator is to run away on two legs. Running away on all fours would be much better. Or even to free up the hands to use weaponry or tools is inconsistent with the archaeological evidence. We just don't have any evidence of tools at that time. Looks like bipedalism long precedes that.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the book, and it definitely surprised me as well. I said, because I think the general kind of hypothesis is that, like, well, it was bigger brains. We learned how to use tools. Then we started walking on two legs. And so then it's like, well, that looks very different if we were doing that already, or other earlier versions of humans were doing that in our history. And then, but it was just a change of location. So we were already doing that in the trees. Now we just did that on the ground. And then we developed the bigger brains. And then we did develop the idea for how do we use tools. And it's like, well, that looks very different. But I think that's why it's really important to note that we're not the only ones that are bipedal, but the uses for it and then how it evolves, it makes it more specific and intentional, I would say. And I think that's also really helpful too. When I read that, I was like, wow, that really is more clear and helpful.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the great discoveries of the last 15 years that has helped us really, understand that time period in our evolutionary history much better is a skeleton known as Ardi, or Artipithecus ramidus. And the first bones were found by Johannes Haile Selassie, who I've already mentioned, who is now at Arizona State University. And it was a team led by Tim White and Berhane Asfaw. And they were working in sediments that are about 4.5 million years old. And at that time, we had so little from that time period. And they found a partial skeleton. They found a Lucy, but over 1 million years older than Lucy. And it's such a fascinating skeleton. It's so much more ape-like, so much more primitive than Lucy is. It still has a grasping big toe. And so it's able to climb trees, long arms, curved fingers, but the pelvis, and not the inside of the foot where the grasping toe is, but the outside of the foot. The outside of the foot looks a lot like ours. It's stiff and rigid. And so Ardi, when she was taking a step, would have been able to push off the ground with the outside of the foot and use it as a rigid lever like we use our entire foot for. So it would have been probably less efficient walking than we can. But it still was this, here's your transitional form, right? Here's this wonderful body that is beginning to experiment with terrestrial bipedalism. And then the pelvis, it's pretty crushed, so it had to be reconstructed. And we paleoanthropologists argue about reconstructions all the time. And so, we'll see where this eventually lands. But for the time being, it looks like it has some of those key ingredients for repositioning the hip musculature so that when you take a step and lift your leg, you don't just fall over and wobble from side to side like an upright chimpanzee or bear will do, just wobble back and forth. Instead, it could walk in a straight line because of that rearrangement of the hip musculature, which is just a function of changing the angle of where your hips are. So it's probably a slight tweak to the development of the pelvis. And here you have something that can now move on two legs, but still scramble into the trees for food and to get away from predators when it needs to.
Yeah, I remember reading this, and I was really kind of blown away by it, because it says, like, to me it was like, well, the utility of it was, okay, if you're in the trees and then on the ground, but it's not quite complete on one, because humans are on the ground now, we're not in the trees. But then that would make sense. Okay, you still have the grasping thumb, but then the outside of the foot, and then the pelvis, because chimps, they kind of have like a wobble of sorts. But that the functionality of it is like, whoa, like this is super old. That's super old. Like that's, so I know you mentioned Artie, but maybe take us back to Lucy, because most people know Lucy. They've heard about Lucy. What's like the big thing with her? Why is she important in general, and then for bipedalism, and then also what kind of class she sits in?
Yeah.
I remember you talked about this in the book of like, well, maybe she's in it's a little bit in the weeds, but it could be fun of the understanding that was like, well, maybe there's different classes we didn't know based on a variety of things. So talk a little bit about Lucy and all her importance.
Oh, Lucy, she is the icon of our science and and always will be. I mean, we've found more complete skeletons. We've now found older skeletons. But you know, a starting point, you know, you always want to meet people where they are when it comes to human evolution. And a starting point that I always have with folks, you know, just bumping into on the street or with family members, you know, around the table at the holidays, is Lucy. You know, okay, here's Lucy in time, here's Lucy in space, and then we can go from there. So Lucy's 3.18 million years old, 3.2 million years old. And she was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974 by Don Johanson and Tom Gray. Don Johanson is at Arizona State University, which is sort of this big hub for human evolution, especially now. Lucy was so important because she was one of the first. She was the first early hominin of that age that was a skeleton. So we had found skulls, and they looked like the brains were rather small, and we had found skeletons or at least body parts, and they looked like our ancestors were walking on two legs, but nobody had found one that actually put those pieces together and could say with certainty, okay, upright walking preceded brain enlargement. Now we've got it. There's no question now that was the order of things. And it wasn't like, you know, brains were slightly, you know, we're getting slightly bigger as bipedalism was getting slightly better. No, these things were not in lockstep. Upright walking happened first, and then brain enlargement happened after that. Lucy, you know, also I think is important, you know, in part because she was a female, and based on the size, we can tell that based on canine size and body size, in comparisons to other remains that we found. And you know, apologies to your listeners, but females are just more interesting in terms of understanding the paleobiology of a species than the males are. At least I think. I'm really interested in the evolution of childbirth. We can get into that, you know, later if you want.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me too. Yeah.
And Lucy has this beautifully preserved pelvis, and from that we can infer what the mechanics of childbirth were like. So there are lots of things that we can learn from Lucy and continue to learn from Lucy. You know, I always tell my students that don't assume we have all these bones figured out. You know, fresh eyes on these fossils allows us to see new things. And so we're still learning things from the Lucy skeleton and from her species as we find additional fossils, because she's not head to toe complete. Lots of things missing from her hands and feet. For instance, her face was not discovered. It was just her lower jaw and parts of her skull. And so there was a paper that came out just last year that was reconstructing what pieces of the skull they have to try to get a brain volume, for instance. And it's now the most reasonable, accurate, I think, brain volume that we've had for Lucy up to this point. So we're still, squeezing information out of these old bones. And what we're learning about Lucy and her kind is that they walked on two legs a lot like we do. That she was not some hunched over, chimpanzee-like thing. She was a striding biped, a lot like we are. Her legs were shorter than ours, even compared for body size. And so she wouldn't have been able to take quite the length of the step that we take. And so the distance she would have been able to travel around her territory might have been less. So their home ranges might have been a little bit less than a typical modern human hunter-gatherer, or even say Homo erectus. But yeah, she walked a lot like us. And what I love about Lucy's kind is that we don't have to just rely on the comparison of her bones to the bones of humans and chimpanzees and other species, her species left us footprints. And so we can use these ancient footprints at a site called Laetoli in Tanzania to really fill in the gaps of the mechanics of how they moved from point A to point B. And once again, it was, there were subtle differences between, we think, how they walked and how we walked, how we walk today. But the differences are just that, they're subtle. That, an average person at a distance seeing a Lucy walking across the landscape would just think it was a small person.
Yeah. So a few things on Lucy. So she was of the subspecies of Australopithecus afarensis. Is that right?
Afarensis, named after the people of the area. I'm sorry, the area, the Afar of that region of Ethiopia. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this subspecies within Australopithecus is, we can say, bipedal, right?
Oh yeah.
And you talked about in the book I'm going to get this wrong, foramen magnum for balance, right?
Yeah, the hole at the bottom of the skull. Yep.
Yeah. So explain that a little bit, and then you were already talking about like the pelvis. I'll just say one before you jump in, that if the common ancestor for kind of going back to what we were saying about classification, so the common ancestor from all apes was 6 million-ish years ago. Lucy sits right in the middle because she's at 3-ish million.
Yeah, that's right. So the common ancestor would be between us and chimpanzees. Of all apes, you'd go back even further than that. But right, so I love where Lucy sits chronologically, because we think of her as so ancient, and of course she is. Yeah. But right, she really is the chronological halfway point between that common ancestor with chimpanzees and you and I sitting here today. Yeah.
So go back to the foramen magnum, because that was super fascinating. Balance, and then how it connects with the pelvic region, which you've already kind of alluded to.
Yeah. So people ask me a lot, how do you know? And it's a valid question that any scientist should be prepared to answer. When you say something about the world, how do you know? What is your evidence? And so how do we know that Lucy walked on 2 legs? How do we know that any of these things walked on 2 legs? And what we've been able to determine by studying the skeletons of humans and the skeletons of our close living relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas, and the skeletons of other animals, is that you can pick up slight skeletal differences, what we'd call skeletal correlates of upright walking, literally from your head to your toes. That all through our skeletons, all through our bodies, are these little tweaks, these little changes in our bones that allow us to balance our bodies on 2 legs and then take a striding gait. And so there's plenty of anatomy in our feet, in our toes, in our heels, in our ankles. Some of these are the sizes of the joints, some of them the shapes, some of them the angles. Our knee is one of the best places to find evidence for upright walking. Our knee is angled in. We are a knock-kneed species. Our knees are really close together. Other species, their knees are far apart. And the cool thing about that is that you're not born that way. You're born with your knees far apart. And you have to walk on 2 legs to get the changes to the growth plate of your knees that forces them together. And so if you find a knee and it's angled like that, not only could that thing walk on 2 legs, it had to have walked on 2 legs. It's the only way to get that anatomy. And we have a knee from Lucy's species. Lucy herself has a knee. It's just crushed terribly, so it's difficult to know. But there are other knees from her species that tell us that she had that anatomy. The spinal column in humans is S-shaped. It has this curve in it, and it produces what's called the small of the lower back, the indentation in your lower back. That's the beginning of that curve in what's called the lumbar region of your spine, lumbar lordosis. Then it curves back out and then back in again. And it then aligns the vertebra into the hole at the bottom of your skull. And that's called the foramen magnum. Foramen means hole, magnum means big. It just means big hole. And that's this giant, hole at the bottom of the skull where your spinal cord exits the brain and travels down the vertebral column. So the position of that hole ends up being different in something moving on 2 legs versus something on all 4s. It exits the back of the skull in a quadruped because their spine is horizontal,
Sure, yeah.
and it exits the bottom of the skull in a human or anything else moving on two legs. So, when we find skulls, I study bipedalism. I like, when we find feet and knees and pelvises and backs. But even still, when you find a skull, you can tell something about the position of the body and whether it was upright or not, just from the hole at the base of the skull. And again, Lucy has a shattered skull, but her species, we have a number of skulls from her species, and they all look a lot like us in having that hole right at the bottom. Lucy has a beautiful spinal column, a really nice hip joint. The pelvis. Yeah, I mean, one of the best places to find evidence for bipedalism is in the pelvis, and those hip muscles that I mentioned earlier. And sure enough, in Lucy, the pelvis is a lot like, but not identical to, but a lot like the pelvis in a human.
No, that's great. I think that's really helpful for listeners to understand kind of like you were saying, what is it specifically that we can kind of hang our hat on and say, like, yes, definitely bipedal. And so then going back to Ardi, which is about 1 million years earlier than Lucy. And as you were saying earlier, and this was from the Ramidus subspecies, right? So it's a different species and earlier also has bipedalism.
Yeah, but not the full suite like Lucy has. So Ardi has some of the ingredients, but not the whole package. So Ardi, like Lucy, has a stiff, rigid outside part of the foot. But unlike Lucy, it still has that grasping big toe. Lucy, we can tell from, again, the bones that have been found in her vicinity, but also those footprints. The big toe was not grasping. It was in line with the other digits, like it is in us. So already with Australopithecus, with this genus Australopithecus, they had sacrificed that grasping big toe, presumably for bipedal efficiency. When you're walking, you want to transfer weight to that big toe and push off that big toe, and that gives you a more efficient stride. And likely that's what was the driving selective factor behind the changes of the foot in Australopithecus, but it meant losing the ability to grasp. And losing the ability to grasp has some huge consequences for your ability to get up into a tree at night, or to get some food for yourself. And I think that some of those changes related to bipedalism then end up affecting the social life and social behavior in Australopithecus. So think, for instance, of, you're an Artipithecus, you've got a grasping big toe, and so does your baby, and you want to go climb a tree to get a piece of fruit. Okay, well, your baby's hanging onto your fur, and you just go and climb that tree and get your piece of fruit, and you're fine. Kind of like what chimpanzees do. If you're Lucy, you can't do that. You put a baby on your back and it's gonna slide right off. It's not gonna be able to grasp the way an Artipithecus or a modern ape can. So you have to now physically carry it in your arms. And then you don't have that grasping ability with your own feet, but you're supposed to climb up into a tree to not get eaten by a leopard at night. So what are you supposed to do? To me, this is a recipe for cooperative care of infants. That you need to hand those kids off to other members of the group, hand the kid up into the tree. This could also be the beginnings of baby slings and making some form of technology, some form of sling out of banana leaves or some large leaf. But to me, this is evidence that once you evolve committed terrestrial bipedalism, it can only happen in this social context where you're also doing some babysitting and cooperative parenting of these kids, because they can't just cling on to mom all the time. And if they do, she's going to have a hard time staying away from predators and getting food for herself. And look, that is going to be the big target of natural selection, is going to be a mother and her infant. So her ability to survive ends up being absolutely critical. And if it means handing that kid off, it means you in that society, that needs to be a tolerant, pro-social group that's going to take an infant and then not do harm to it, as can happen often in chimpanzee groups.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I think that's helpful to understand because, we've obviously lost that part of our foot, so we've replaced it, so now we have it, the way we know it, right? And we walk straight. And so it's kind of like we give up some things, but we gain some things. And as we've evolved, that's how it works.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And Australopithecus, I think, is the gateway into that. Where, right. So, you lost the grasping toe, but now what are you gaining? You're gaining pro-sociality and some, intragroup tolerance. In addition to that, okay, you're bipedal now, you're moving on two legs across your environment. It means you freed up your arms and your hands. You don't have to use these things for locomotion anymore.
Right.
And so now this is the raw material for evolution to act on, and to evolve these hands that then end up being these instruments for ingenuity and construction of stone tools. And so think about it. Lucy's 3.18 million years old, 3.2 million years old, if we're going to round it. There are members of her species that are about 3.4 million, and they may go back even farther than that. There are some fossils that go back maybe to 3.7 million or so. The oldest stone tools now go back 3.3 million. So when Lucy was first discovered, she was found in the 1970s. The oldest stone tools were from Olduvai Gorge. They were 1.8 million, and they were attributed to Homo habilis. So you had, stone tools are the purview of genus Homo. You have to have a big brain to make stone tools. 1.8 million. Okay, Lucy and her kind, they evolved bipedalism, but they've got small brains that are making tools. So the archaeological evidence went from 1.8 and then it went back to 2.6 million with the discovery of a site in Ethiopia. And now it's a somewhat controversial site, but it's reasonable to me that at a site in Kenya, you now have stone tools at 3.3 million. So Lucy and her kind, freeing the hands, becoming terrestrial bipeds on this environment, in a tough environment to live in, they become the first sort of biocultural animal that they can tap into an external resource that they can then use to acquire food more efficiently. And boy, and now we're flying helicopters on Mars, right? But it starts there.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great, and that kind of leads into further into the book as you're we're in part 2 of the book where you start talking about okay, well, we see Australopithecus where they have all the different types. I can't pronounce all the different but the new one that was discovered or found, Sediba, is this right?
Sediba,
Sediba. Where again finding subspecies within Australopithecus, and so tell us a little bit about that and how that showed different ways to walk or be bipedal.
Sure, absolutely. So the species, Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, she, very much established for our field that bipedalism is ancient. Lots of debates have still carried on about how human-like was her bipedalism. And my interpretation is that it was very, very human-like. And so this is my mindset as I'm sort of, finishing up my PhD, working on the foot bones and leg bones of Australopithecus. To me, they all sort of, whether they're from South Africa, Eastern Africa, they all look more or less the same. They're very human-like. Okay. So in 2009, there was an expedition that was done by Lee Berger, who's a paleontologist in South Africa. And he had actually been using Google Earth to map this landscape in what's called the cradle of humankind in South Africa. And he was looking for clusters of trees. These were olive trees and stinkwood trees, because these trees are water dependent, and the water would pool at the base of caves. A lot of the fossils in South Africa are found in caves, so he's searching for caves. And these trees would then grow out of the caves and serve as bullseyes for where the caves were. And using this technique, he was able to discover hundreds of new caves that nobody knew existed on this landscape. And he then went out to survey them, and he brought his kid with him, his 9-year-old Matthew. And he said, Matthew, go find some fossils. And Matthew went running off and tripped over a rock and said, hey, Dad, I found some fossils. And his father came over and, assuming there'd be zebra fossils, antelope fossils. I mean, we find lots of fossils in this area, and they're almost always of other animals. And these happen to be the collarbone and the lower jaw of an Australopithecus.
So
I mean, what a discovery by a 9-year-old, right? So the site itself, it's called Malapa, was then excavated, and two partial skeletons were discovered. Wow. What an amazing discovery. They're about 2 million years old. And I was brought onto the team to study the feet and the legs. I just finished my PhD thesis, and it's the dream of a PhD student, right? To be handed a project like that you can apply your thesis to. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling Lee Berger that, oh, no problem. I know what the foot of Australopithecus looks like. Just send me replicas of the fossils, and I'll plug them into my graphs, and be able to send them back, no problem. And that's not how it unfolded. These bones look different from my wildest expectations. They were clearly from something moving on 2 legs. They had all of the hallmarks of a biped, but the shapes of the heel, aspects of the ankle, the knee anatomy, just were way different from Lucy's. A completely different sort of flavor of Australopithecus. So it was named a new species, Australopithecus sediba. And then I got to work trying to figure out, okay, well, it's bipedal, but not like Lucy is. Mm-hmm. They're completely different shapes to these bones. What is going on here? And I ended up working with a physical therapist who very much thinks head to toe. How does the foot affect the knee, affect the back, affect even the jaw? Mm-hmm. And then a former podiatrist turned paleoanthropologist named Bernd Zipfel in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And the three of us together worked on this skeleton for years trying to figure it out. And we think it walked with this very unusual gait that some humans do today. It's called hyperpronation. And if you do this, if you walk this way, it's pathological. It causes all sorts of problems with your knee and your hips and your back. But this skeleton had the anatomical solutions to the very problems humans have if they walk this way. So I think it was adapted to move in this manner. And I think it moved this way because it also shows all sorts of evidences for still being able to climb trees really, really well. So if you're going to still get up into the tree for your food and to get away from predators and to do it frequently, then your bipedal gait might actually be altered as a result. And that's what I think is happening. And so this ends up being an example of a bigger trend that we see at this time in human evolution, which is experimentation in bipedal gait. That Lucy's way of walking was not the only way. That different species of Australopithecus throughout Eastern and Southern Africa were actually evolving these different ways to walk. And it's so much fun to think about, like, jumping in a time machine and going on some safari in Africa 2.5 million years ago and seeing all these different forms of Australopithecus walking in these different ways. That's at least what of course we can't do that. So the next best thing is to examine the bones. And that's the story to me that the bones are telling.
Yeah. And it's, they have become one of my favorite pieces in the our evolutionary history, because it's because of that. There's just so, reading the book and reading other materials is seeing like how many there were, what the variance was, and it was this kind of foraging from different ways of doing things right before you get humans and Homo sapiens. And so and tell me, so the big thing, the next big thing in this part is Homo erectus, which is after, right? Or is it concurrent after Australopithecus? Or we don't know, we're a little fuzzy on that.
So there's been a new discovery, as new discoveries happen, right? And there's this really marvelous skull of a young Homo erectus from South Africa, and it's 2 million years old, which means that Homo erectus would have coexisted on the landscape with Australopithecus sediba.
Yeah, that's wild.
Right. So we think that Homo, the genus Homo, may have a deeper branch, a deeper root. But then it would have coexisted with Australopithecus and these big toothed Australopithecines we call Paranthropus. But yeah, now what exact species of Australopithecus evolved into Homo, into Homo erectus? We don't know. We probably haven't found it yet.
What I bring up Homo erectus just because in the book you talk about this, and so I have a central question here. But Homo erectus, they evolved longer legs, arched feet, they could walk a long distance, and that's probably how they were able to move into Asia and Europe, and then we get all the other Neanderthals, Denisovans, and stuff.
Totally.
So, but then one of the things that I never thought about this, and I think it's one of the really fascinating parts about the book is, well, Homo erectus and that evolved nature of being bipedal and the way they were bipedal, and then how they were able to do things. And you can really see it it's kind of like a skill. It's just building on it, right? We start with Ardi all the way back 4.5 million years ago. And then we get all the way up to 2 million and then earlier, or excuse me, later. And then you say, okay, now we start to see some elements of language, right? Because now if you're looking at someone face to face, upright, that's gonna, and I never thought of it that way. Maybe if I sat down and thought about it, but yes, there is a difference between being on all fours or kind of hunched over or in a tree or, but being upright at that point, and that's how you're doing things. And sure, you can, obviously, if you can just walk, you're not crawling around, yes, you can walk and go to all these different parts of the globe, but then the language piece, right? Because then you get facial recognition. You get at a different way. You get different ways of understanding how the form of language. So you can chat about that, but the central question there is, could there have been? I mean, this is a kind of a what if. So, but it might be hard to answer. But could there have been other ways that these various species could have evolved brains, language, eating different foods, if they weren't bipedal, right? So another way of saying that is, do you think bipedalism was essential to these evolved components, or is it just kind of a thing to keep looking into?
I don't. We see very large brains and complex communication abilities in whales. And they don't even have legs, right? So they're not bipedal,
right?
And so no, I think there are multiple paths to brain enlargement and to complex communication. It'd be fascinating to think about, what other ways it can happen. I'm always so interested in like octopus, right? They're really clever.
Yes.
And again, not a biped. So no, I don't think bipedalism itself necessarily is. I don't think it's inevitable that language and brain enlargement will follow from that. I think there are these other ingredients that are necessary for that to happen. However, in our case, when your starting point is an ape, and you are trying to, if you're looking for how do you connect the dots between that common ancestor and this thing we are today, to me, what was a necessary prerequisite for everything that we celebrate as uniquely human is in fact bipedalism. That if we were quadrupeds still, or if we evolved knuckle walking or something like that as a form of locomotion, as chimpanzees and gorillas did, I don't think the Louvre would exist. Right. So I really do think that bipedalism was set the stage for it almost lined up those dominoes. And then once those started, you end up having other factors affecting brain enlargement. For instance, the development of controlled fire ends up being pretty critical for us to ward off predators, to effectively digest food outside the body, so that it ends up being more efficient and more resource rich when it's in you. And so a lot of those things, again, maybe aren't possible if you don't have freed hands to make stone tools, to control fire. But language was the one. In this book, I really did. After 15 years of teaching this and thinking about this and researching this, I was connecting these dots between bipedalism and technology, bipedalism and brain enlargement, bipedalism and childbirth, bipedalism and how we parent our kids, bipedalism and diet. That, hey, look, you're now a slow biped out on a dangerous African landscape. You better not be picky.
Right.
Like, eat what you can get, and get back into safety, or you're going to get eaten by the leopard. So the fact that we eat everything, if it has DNA in it, we've tried it. I again attribute that to us not being dietary specialists because we were bipedal and slow. Language is the one connection of the dots that I think is the most speculative in the book, but it made it one of the most fun to write.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it because it really was like almost like a thought exercise. It's like, I've never really thought of it that way. It's you're very, I don't say cautious, but you're very, upfront about that, right? Like this isn't like definitive, but that it is interesting to think about and how that works.
Yeah,
how that plays in.
I think so. I mean, all these sounds that you and I are making back and forth require fine controlled breathing of our chest muscles. And, one of the things that, you as you move your house, right, and you're carrying big, heavy boxes, it's hard to talk at the same time you're carrying something really heavy. Right. And to me, that's sort of analogous to using your arms weight bearing when you're moving, when you're running. So if you're galloping, then using all those muscles for locomotion probably prevents them from being able to contract with those fine movements necessary for the little particulate sounds that we make and we call speech, and then attach symbolic meanings to them, and we call that language. And so being up on two legs, I think, frees up the upper limb and the muscles of the chest to then take on that role, to be able to make those little chirping sounds and these tiny little sounds we make. And I bet that started with Australopithecus. It's almost impossible to test, though, because language doesn't preserve well in the fossil record. And what, little we have from, say, Australopithecus is a bone in the neck called the hyoid, which is shaped very differently in humans than in chimpanzees. And we think it is related to the muscles and ligaments attached to it that are important for controlled speech and language. And in Australopithecus, it looks just like an apes. And so the explanation there was that, okay, well, then they probably aren't talking. And I buy that. But they may have been communicating with their hands. And like you said, with facial expressions, I hadn't even really thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Looking someone in the face like that and being expressive. But by the time you get to Homo erectus, indeed, you see changes to some of the neuroanatomy, asymmetry to Broca's area of the brain. There's a hyoid from Homo erectus, or at least a later Homo erectus, that looks a lot like ours. And then you start to see symbolic behavior. You see big game hunting. I don't know how you take down a big animal if you're not planning it out beforehand. It just, to me, all the pieces are there for Homo erectus to have symbolic language. And maybe I'm wrong on that. It's a controversial topic. Lots of paleoanthropologists argue about the origins of language.
Yeah, for sure.
But if I am wrong, if language is something that comes much later, then that's even more amazing what Homo erectus was able to behaviorally pull off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, again, we talked about it earlier, but, the whole idea of bipedal posture is just, most people have said, and you put in your book is, it frees your hands to use tools. We can see over tall grass and avoid predators. We can stand upright in water, and we can gain stamina when we're tracking prey. So you can see all these uses. And so, I was really happy with the third part of the book as well, because it kind of comes out of the like historical kind of context, and it kind of brings it to the present about what we know about, well, what we kind of take for granted in being bipedal. But fragility of knees, which I totally empathize with that chapter. How there's that one chapter on developmental aspects of learning to walk, gait, the myokines, all that stuff is really, really interesting. And I definitely hope people will get the book and read all those pieces. I have one quick question about gait, and then I want to just talk about the obstetrical dilemma. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, sure.
Because that was absolutely, just fascinating to me. With gait, when we're talking about Australopithecus and the different types of gait they could have, all at the same time if we were getting a time machine. Yeah. And I wonder, one of the things that still it's a really, I don't know about you, I have this like strange feeling every time I see one. I have this like deep fascination and kind of like creepy feeling at the same time when I see like a bonobo stand upright, because I was like, that looks so close to us in terms of their gait, right? They look like human. Yeah. Like you chimps, you're like, okay, they got the kind of the waddle, obviously gorillas, but bonobos, I mean, they look very similar to us, and it's like, that's human. Like that feels very human.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it blows my mind every time I see it, but I love bonobos. They're probably the most fascinating of the apes.
Oh, they're amazing.
Yeah. And so yeah, just briefly talk about gait, I guess, in comparison with all of them and how we have it. And obviously each individual person has their own kind of gait, and then we can get into the reproductive piece.
Sure. Yeah. So, gait is just a term to characterize how an animal gets from point A to point B, and all the sort of angles and the foot placement and all that thing. So that stuff, it can get really technical. Mm-hmm. But all your listeners are going to know that you can walk outside and watch a bunch of people walk by, and they're all going to walk by slightly differently. Some walk very fast, mm-hmm. Some walk very slowly, some are taking long strides, some are taking short strides, some move with their arms a lot, some not much at all. And people have begun to think about this as a biometric tool, as a way to identify individuals. Simply by their gait. And there was a research lab that I visited for this book research at MIT, where they are developing such a tool. And sure enough, just from somebody's footprint, you can identify them with extraordinary accuracy. Mm-hmm. And even if they're, I said, wait a minute here, what about, like Kaiser Soze at the end of Usual Suspects, where turns out he's got a completely different gait. And no, it looks like it can, as long as you sort of feed it enough information, that these systems are quite accurate at picking up your footprint. Your footprint is almost like a fingerprint. Yeah. So everyone has their own unique style and their own unique gait. And the other thing that I found fascinating that Xavier, you might know much more about this than I do. Probably do that our brains are super tuned into how people move. Mm-hmm. And that we can identify. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but there was such a vast literature on it, that we are really, really good at picking up on these subtle cues, mm-hmm. That allow us to identify individuals by their gait. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, I tell a quick story about my wife works on the same campus that I do, mm-hmm. and I can look across the green, mm-hmm. and not only can I know it's her, mm-hmm. even if it's just a silhouette. The sun is angled in a way that I can't see her face, but I know it's her. I can tell if she's in a good mood or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, that was so wonderfully fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down this rabbit hole of trying to, learn about that and think about that, not only as it pertains to humans today, but to think about how that would have then been adaptive for our ancestors. And so, right, as you were, mentioning at the lead to this question, if you have multiple hominins coexisting on a landscape, it's going to be important for them to know who's who.
Mm-hmm.
And which ones are members of their group, their species, which ones are maybe part of a different species or a different group. And these subtle gait differences may, and again, this is a hypothesis to test. These may have been some of those cues that were used to identify at a distance,
Mm-hmm.
a friendly individual, or maybe a neighbor who was a foe, a different species, a competitor. Being able to pick up on individuals coming back from a hunt. Say, were they successful? Are they walking with a spring in their step, or are they dragging their heels and their heads are slouched? Knowing that body language actually communicates something might have been important for our ancestors.
Yeah, that part of the book, it really kind of got my mind going a lot in that part of the book, because about gait, because it is fascinating. People are looking more into it because there are these types of cues, and we're so good as humans. Well, we're good at creating them, but we're also really good at over relying on them to our detriment sometimes. But all of these certain heuristics we have, right? We'll create all of these, mental shortcuts, and then, and sometimes that gets us into trouble. And we can do that with many things. But I think just like what you're saying with gait, I don't remember which nature documentary I was watching. I don't know. Attenborough has done all of them, so I can't. His voice is like, he's always in my head. But it was one of the newer ones about how, like, all of the penguins in Australia, and when they go away and then they come back or whatever, I forget the narrative, but there'll be like 1 million on the shore, and trying to find their young, right? It's like impossible. I mean, it's a penguin, they have to waddle over there, and they have distinct vocal calls. And now you're trying to pick out in 1 million penguins that distinct, and it's like, that's crazy. I mean, it's incredible to me. That stuff blows my mind. But it's like, but I wonder if gait and nonverbals kind of work that way sometimes with humans. So kind of the example you're giving with your wife, if you see her across the way, you can pick up a lot, not everything. And again, like I said, sometimes that gets us in trouble if we're making too many, over relying on a heuristic. But they help us as we evolve to say, like, how do we understand or pick up some sense of, mood or affect or presence or things like that. And again, I never made the connection with bipedalism, but now it's like, oh wow, like that's super fascinating about how being upright and what that does for your gait. The other thing personally for me is, since I was a young adolescent, I have pretty bad scoliosis. So not enough with the surgery and the bar and my spine and stuff, thankfully, but it's, it's definitely curved. And so it's also a funny thing because it does impact, one hip, side of my hip is higher than the other, one shoulder is higher than the other. And my walk, for sure. I mean, I definitely will my right leg, I don't notice it. It's normal to me, but my wife and my daughter will pick on me and say, I can't walk like a duck, and I have this sort of kind of balance in this gait. And and it's interesting though how gait really does have this strange aspect of not personality, but I don't know. There's cues about the nonverbals about the uniqueness of an individual. I'll say that, and it is it's very fascinating to me. So I really like that part in particular. And then kind of my comment about bonobos. So it's like, it's not the fact that they stand upright. It's sort of kind of the gait too, because they don't do the kind of wobble as much as the chimps. And it's like, I mean, their hands look so similar to ours, and they're upright and how they walk, and like, it just starts getting real close.
It sure does.
Which is so cool, but it's also a little creepy too.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me definitely about the reproductive aspect of understanding bipedalism. I found, tell us about the dilemma. Tell us about that piece of it, because I didn't know some of this stuff, and your emphasis on it was super cool. I really enjoy that part.
Yeah, another chapter I absolutely loved writing. This is a topic that I've researched myself. I've been quite interested in the evolution of childbirth, but the way I tackled it in the book was to think about gait differences between men and women, and that's something that most of your listeners will be familiar with. That that there tend to be, it's a generalization, but there tend to be these gait differences, and it's been attributed to differences in the pelvis that have been attributed to the fact that women are the ones that give birth. Okay, so what we can see in the fossil record is that the earliest pelvic anatomy of some of the oldest apes is long before Artipithecus. Had a birth canal that was expanded from front to back, or really, because of the pelvis being tilted in the body, it's really from top to bottom. And that's more or less the shape of the birth canal in chimpanzees. And so your listeners won't be able to see this, but I'm showing you now the shape of a pelvis in a chimpanzee. And then this is a chimpanzee head I have in my hand. It's a newborn chimpanzee. This is a plastic model. I don't have a real chimpanzee newborn head. And so now we're going to simulate birth in a chimpanzee just by dropping the head down through the birth canal, and it falls through with absolutely no difficulty whatsoever. Chimpanzees have extraordinarily easy births compared to births in humans. Their labors are short. Birth is such that a baby is born with usually with its head facing forward. So its mom can look down and see the face of the baby being born, and can reach down and assist with her birth, and then begin nursing right away. Okay. Chimpanzees also give birth usually alone up in a tree at night. So very few people have actually seen this. This has been observed mostly in captivity. All right. That is not how humans typically give birth. What's happened as a result of bipedalism is that the pelvis has changed shape dramatically. So the human pelvis is short and squat. It's compressed from top to bottom. And then where the hips are, where the bony hips are, where the muscles attach, in humans, they've wrapped around to the side of the body.
It kind of flattens out and curves a little bit.
Yeah. And in chimpanzees, they're tall up and down, and they're more on the back. And so that helps a chimpanzee extend its leg when it's climbing. And in humans, those muscles now have been recruited for balancing the body when you're standing on a single leg. But what's happened, notice what's happened is the distance between where the back of a chimpanzee is and a hip. So a huge distance. And in humans, that distance has been reduced.
Like half, right?
Yes.
So
and what
close.
that does, it lowers the center of mass. It makes us much more stable on our two legs. But it squishes the birth canal. So bipedalism has led to these major structural changes of the pelvis that allow us to move more efficiently on two legs, but it changes the birth canal in a way that when you now try to give birth like a chimpanzee, so I have a human newborn head, again, plastic, and then a human pelvis. And if I try to birth this head through the human pelvis, it gets stuck.
There's some difficulty there.
So what do you have to do? The baby rotates. So first it rotates to the side, and then it rotates to the back, and it's born facing backwards.
Uh-huh.
So when a mom is giving birth, if she looks down, she's going to see the back of the head of the infant. 95% of the time, about 5% of the time is what's called a sunny side up birth, and the baby's face is there. But those births actually often are much longer labor and much more
risky. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the births with the best outcomes are the ones where there's this corkscrewing of the baby, a twisting of the baby through the birth canal because of the geometry of the pelvis. Okay, so now let's look at Lucy. Here's Lucy's pelvis.
Oh, it's so wild.
And let's have her give birth to a baby the size the head with a head the size of chimpanzees, and you try to birth it like a human, like a chimpanzee. Can't do it. It gets stuck
because there's not any of the twisting.
So so let's twist it now. So here comes the baby twisting through, and it comes through.
Right. So with chimps, they don't twist.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So it's called rotational birth, and just the shape of Lucy's bones tell us that she almost certainly had some degree of a rotational birth with her infants. And with humans, if you have a rotational birth, right, and then the mom reaches down and tries to assist with her own baby's birth, she's going to pull on the neck of that baby and can actually injure it quite a bit. So what do we have in humans cross-culturally all around the world when people are giving birth? Helpers.
Right.
There are always helpers present. Usually, if historically it's been female, experienced females, midwives. I think the same was going on with Lucy and her kind, simply because of the geometry of the pelvis. Now, what this has led to, and this is getting a little long-winded, but
no, it's great.
It's great. Obstetrical dilemma.
No, it's great.
So what this has led to is this observation that, okay, birth is difficult. Birth is dangerous. There are women who die in childbirth. And so why not make the pelvis bigger? Why not just widen those spaces? Why not make the pelvis bigger? Well, if the changes to the pelvis that led to this in the first place were related to upright walking, well, then that must be why the pelvis doesn't just get bigger. There must be this trade-off, this tug of war, this classic evolutionary tug of war going on between the difficulties of childbirth and the efficiency of upright walking. And by having women have a slightly wider pelvis, a slightly broader pelvis than most men do, it allows them to give birth. And it also allows them to get from point A to point B. But, and here's where the obstetrical dilemma comes in, is that the assumption has been, but they're less efficient. And that women must be less efficient walkers than men. There's your trade-off. So you can have a spacious pelvis for childbirth, but it's going to come at the expense of getting from point A to point B. So this is what's known as the obstetrical dilemma. It also includes the idea that we're born somewhat prematurely, and that's necessary to sort of fit us through the birth canal. Okay, so this has been accepted anthropological wisdom for decades.
Right.
And in the 1980s, Karen Rosenberg and Wenda Trevathan began to interrogate this a little bit. And they're the ones that said, wait a minute, it's not the tightness of the birth canal, it's the rotation. So they're the ones that connected the dots between the rotational birth and social birth, and maybe even the presence of midwives and things as far back as Australopithecus, which I absolutely think they're spot on. But into just even 10 years ago, the obstetrical dilemma was accepted wisdom in our science. And then a couple of researchers started questioning it and saying, wait a minute, are we sure? How do we know that women are less efficient walkers than men are? Has anyone ever actually tested that? And it turns out the answer was no, that nobody had properly done this work. They just assumed it was true. And so Anna Warner and Kara Wall-Scheffler, Holly Dunsworth, and others have, through slightly different means tested this hypothesis, and all of them have found that no, women actually walk with as efficient a gait as men do. They tend to have wider hips than most men, and so biomechanically, what that results in is more rotation. And so there is a slightly different way to walk for a lot of women compared to a lot of men, with more hip rotation, but it's just as efficient as getting from point A to point B. And so the obstetrical dilemma, this idea that childbirth has somehow compromised gait in women, we now don't think is the case at all. And there was a paper that came out last week, which isn't in the book. We're constantly right. Book was already out. That showed that that if you have too spacious a birth canal, the problem is not with how you walk. The evolutionary challenge is with the musculature of the pelvic floor and making sure that you don't have pelvic prolapse. Oh, wow. And so this is now the new hypothesis that's gaining some steam, is that what has constrained the birth canal and made it a tight fit throughout evolutionary time has been making sure that the reproductive and digestive organs stay within the body and don't prolapse. And so this is some really exciting new work that's been done as a result of, I think, this questioning of a huge accepted hypothesis in our field, the obstetrical dilemma. And so to me, it's an important message in science in general, that some of the huge ideas in science can be challenged. We can continue to say, hey, wait a minute, are we sure we know this? And what was this based on? And sometimes you go back in the literature and it's some throwaway line in some paper in the 1950s that then people keep citing, but nobody ever really tested. And so, it's really enriched the science in the last 10 years to think about this, what we thought was a classic evolutionary trade-off, is not what we thought it was.
Yeah. One question about that, and then I'll ask my final questions. I remember learning about this, and the first time I learned about it, it absolutely blew my mind because I was super young and I had no idea. The idea that in child birth, the pelvic bones shift.
Yeah.
And it still blows my mind. But how does that fit into all of the elements that you've been talking about, the dilemma, but then also how we understand the shifting between other apes and their pelvic structures, and then humans' pelvic structures? How do we do make literally room, right? At least for women that give birth, that they make room to have their pelvic bones actually shift, like kind of like the plates on the earth, like just shifting the pelvic bones is incredible. Like, how does that kind of fit in here?
It's amazing. So it fits in a couple different ways. The first is that the pubis bones, the two bones in the front of the pelvis, they actually fuse together pretty early and become osteologically adult in apes. In humans, they're greatly delayed. They're one of the last things to actually fully come together. Wow. And so it leaves that space, it leaves that flexibility. And so finding, the bone, that particular part of the skeleton in hominins that have been osteologically sexed as female ends up being this sort of window into when that would have begun. And right now it looks like Homo erectus. Okay. May have had that anatomy. Australopithecus, we're still trying to figure that out. The other place where there is flexibility of the skeleton. So yes, the female skeleton, the pelvis will widen at the pubis. The sacroiliac joint, the joint between the sacrum and the ilium, can loosen and shift. Even the coccyx, the bones of the rudimentary tail that we still sort of have, can become a little more flexible and can move back. They also can break during childbirth. But what happens is the bones of the baby's skull also can be compressed. And so those fontanelles, right, on a newborn, the soft spots on the skull, the bones of the skull have not fused together. And so they're compressible. They can even sort of fold over each other a little bit. And so one of the places where we've been really interested in examining this from an evolutionary standpoint is to look at the presence or absence of fontanelles on infant remains of Australopithecus and early Homo and whatnot. And this has been difficult because infant bones are exceptionally rare,
I can imagine,
in the fossil record. But there was a paper that came out a couple of years ago that argued that an Australopithecus looks like it has some open fontanelles, even though it's upwards of 3 years old. That they're still the remnants of them are still hanging around. And so these are open questions. These are still things we're trying to figure out using these subtle cues that we can pick up, clues I should say, that we can pick up from these fragmentary fossils.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. Yeah, that it's just really is. Well, a few final questions here. I think bipedalism is something that we take for granted. I certainly didn't put much thought into it, and the book is it's well written, but it's really good at not only giving the history of it, but also explaining for us now as Homo sapiens, all of the linkage between all of these things on our previous ancestors, and then what it looks like for us today. And so, kind of for kind of looking towards the future. Right? How does knowing the anthropology of our species help us with issues such as AI and prosthetics, and how does bipedalism in general help us, looking future oriented, help us with our continuing evolutionary journey?
It's a great question. It's not an easy one to answer, but
sure.
Humans have always wondered where they come from. All over the world, cultures past and present have developed origin stories, and I think that gets right to the heart of our own sort of curiosity about ourselves and where we come from and why we are the way we are, and through this incredible process we've developed called science, we now have gathered extraordinary collections of evidence from various lines of reasoning to piece together this new evidence-based narrative for where our species comes from. And so, to me, paleoanthropology and asking these questions of where we come from is fundamentally human. It's what we do. And to me, these fossils that we find, these are not these dusty old bones that tell us about the past. These are the remains of once living, breathing, thinking creatures that laughed and cried and had kids and ate and wondered about their world, much like I do. And so, working with these fossils is just such an extraordinary privilege. And I enjoy tremendously utilizing all of the methods that my colleagues before me have developed to squeeze every tiny bit of information out of these old bones. Because these fossils really do, I think, tell us about us and about our predispositions, and those can be anatomical, those can be behavioral too. One of the examples of this, one of my favorite fossils is this one here, and I write about a similar one in the book, but for now I'll tell you about the one I'm showing on the screen. It's a 2 million year old leg bone. It's a femur from an Australopithecus. And it's broken, it's fragmentary, it's not complete, but still it has all the hallmarks of an upright walker. So this is a good biped, a good Australopithecus. What's unusual about it, though, what's really strange, is that it has this unusual bulge in it that really shouldn't be there. And it's a thickening of bone that is a healed fracture. So here's an individual 2 million years ago, long before hospitals, long before doctors, long before buildings, even before controlled fire. And this Australopithecus is maybe they were running and they stepped in a hole, maybe they fell out of a tree. I don't know how it happened, but they broke their leg, broke their femur. Now, if you and I broke our femur, we'd be in a hospital getting it set, getting a cast, and then you're immobilized for at least 6 weeks. It's a 6-week healing process.
Yeah.
And here's a 2 million year old hominin that broke her leg and survived. How did that happen? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to me, this is evidence that, and this isn't the only one. There's an ankle that shows evidence of a heel fracture. There's a skeleton from Lucy's species, known as Katanumu. And he also has a healed ankle fracture. He would have broken his ankle as a child and then lived to adulthood. It healed. This can't happen unless you have members of the group taking care of each other.
Yeah.
And so these old bones, to me, are telling a story of humans being cooperative and caring and empathetic. And look, everyone knows we can be awful to each other as well. I mean, we have clearly demonstrated that. But just like, walking is not something we think about very much. How good we can be is not something we think about very much either. And to me, the two things are connected. That you couldn't be a surviving, upright, walking hominin on this dangerous landscape millions of years ago, before technology, before hospitals, before doctors, before iPhones, and survive unless you were also social and cooperative. So to me, these two things are intimately linked, and it's something that is, I think, relevant to our everyday situation today. That as we exhibit some of these more negative and violent sides of our human nature, we sometimes forget just how pro-social and empathetic we are. And to me, these old dusty old bones, right, remind me of that every day.
Absolutely. That's so wonderful. I'm glad you stated that. More recently, within evolutionary sciences at large, so behavioral oncology, evolutionary psychology, and even just in psychology in general, there has been more research into this very aspect and seeing where that fits within evolution. I've talked to a few people on the podcast about this very piece, about how we're understanding cooperation for our human species, and how that is super important for many components. It's important for our reputation. It's important for our status. It's important for resources. It's important for so many things that make us human. And the really, again, just the lovely piece about that is, you can also, and many of your colleagues as well, kind of tell the same story, but from how ancient it is and how much further back that goes. And it's a really cool thing in evolutionary science and in paleoanthropology and all of these different disciplines that are kind of seeing this and exploring this and looking at this. And it's like, we've written a lot, we've studied a lot about all the dark nature of ourselves and of other animals and some of the horrible things. And that's still very true, but we have to take time and effort to look at other aspects as well. And one of the key things, there's things that there is cooperation in every species on the planet. Well, not every, but many species on the planet. But there are some things that do make cooperation with humans, Homo Sapiens, unique or somewhat different. And then it's interesting kind of mapping on that piece of it, or kind of layering over it. Well, for us currently as humans, but what about our primordial versions of ourselves, or how did that? And it sounds like there's at least elements of it, and that, again, you wouldn't expect to get that from studying bipedalism, but it's so
Right.
it's so cool. It's so cool how it all links together and works together to tell this really, I think, well-rounded and holistic narrative, which is just absolutely fabulous.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah. No, I like the way you said it. You explained it, and the examples from the bones, and it gives it something tangible and something real. I think is so important for evolutionary sciences in general.
Yep.
Well, I got to say, Jeremy, I mean, this is almost too much fun. I mean, it really was. I really had a blast.
This is great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, talking with you about this stuff. I mean, I get so energized by it. It's so cool, and really just groundbreaking stuff on trying to build on all of the things in the field and other fields, and looking at different aspects. So I really can't thank you enough for coming and talking to me about all this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Where can people find your book, and or where can they find you online, or information about you? Where's the right places to point them, and anything else that you want to add on that? Sure.
So the book is published by HarperCollins. So you can find the book on their website, and certainly, at this time, I would recommend folks try to look at your local bookstore, and ask about that. If you can pick up the book there, that would help support some independent bookstores. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I do have a Twitter account. I'm not terribly active on it. I'm more of a observer than a contributor, but you can find me on Twitter at DeSilva Jerry. And then I also have a Dartmouth website that I post all my papers to, and videos, and any lectures that I give or upcoming talks are usually posted there. I think that more or less is how you can find me. And listeners, I've already, since publishing this book, I've gotten emails from so many people with so much interesting information about walking that I didn't include in the book because I didn't know. And so I'm learning right along with everyone else, even about a topic that I supposedly know a lot about, and wrote a book on.
Yeah.
And so, feel free to shoot me an email if there's something that perked your interest, and you want to keep the conversation going.
That's great. Again, Jeremy, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking and giving me so much of your time and your energy, your brain power, your expertise. I really had so much fun. I can't say enough good things. So it's a big honor.
This is great. Thank you, Xavier. I appreciate it. This is fantastic. It was great to chat with you.
All right. Thank you, man. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, you too.